And I will share my screen. Okay. So welcome to the Division 5 award ceremony. I am so pleased to be here with so many Division 5 members for this important event. In the ceremony today, we will be presenting a number of awards from Division 5. First, we'll be presenting the dissertation awards, then early career awards. Then we'll have 3 distinguished contribution addresses from Eva Marie Sims, Leona Aiken, and myself, and then we'll have a closing from Eric Youngstrom. And I will stop sharing. And at this point, I'd like to call Jeff Rauter and Julia Haft to the stage. Jeff Rauter will be presenting the Anne Anastasia Dissertation Award.
Hi, it's my great pleasure and honor to be presenting this award to Dr. Julia Hoff. Let me tell you a few things about Julia's dissertation real quick. Most folks who are interested in individual differences asks, what do differences in performance correlate to, and what's the structure of this correlation? What Julia did in her dissertation was go back to actually a little bit more of a fundamental question, where she asked about sort of qualitative individual differences. So if we think of a Stroop task, most people respond quicker to congruent items than incongruent. Julia asked, is there anybody who's the opposite? The idea that being, if you're the opposite, you need a different theoretical mechanism, right? Or is there anybody who is truly zero, null? And so she asked, if we have these different theoretically meaningful regions, could we explore individual differences on this basis? The statistics of doing so is a bit complicated, and I won't go into it. It's about assessing many order constraints simultaneously as random effects. And Julia did just such a wonderful job in her dissertation laying out these Bayes factor tests of, does everybody do a task the same way, or are there qualitative individual differences across people? And then she extended it to meta-analysis. Do all studies plausibly show an effect in the same direction, or is there one or two effects, studies that we're sure go the other way? So Julia's dissertation was innovative and foundational, and it just changed the way, at least I and other people have viewed this question of differences across a continuum or a spectrum. Julia is an up-and-coming superstar. I'm so proud of all she's accomplished and contributed. She went through grad school in 3.5 years, which is pretty quick for a quantitative program. She was dedicated and mature and hardworking. It was so wonderful to see. In that time, she was on 11 papers, probably 16 altogether. She then went on for a year of a postdoc, and now she is the newest professor of quantitative psychology at the University of Amsterdam. So super proud of her. It's been such a delight and privilege to be her advisor. And I think as a professor, when you become a professor, the sweetest thing about being a professor is to see your students matriculate and do well. And I thank you, Julia, for all the joy and pride you've brought me. Great job.
Thank you. Okay. I think I'm supposed to hold up my award, but I actually don't have it here. It's still in my office. I have a photo. So I definitely received it. Thank you so much for it. And thank you for nominating me as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so I'll now call Will Adams to the stage, who will be presenting the Distinguished Dissertation in Qualitative Inquiry Award to Nisha Gupta.
Hi there, Nisha.
Hi, Will.
It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here to present this award to Nisha. I'll tell you a little bit about Nisha, and then I'll tell you a little bit about her extraordinary dissertation. So Nisha was a student of mine and of Ava's. I don't think of Elizabeth at Duquesne University. So she was in a class with me. I was her clinical supervisor, and I directed this amazing dissertation that she called Illuminating the Trauma of the Closet Among Sexual Minorities, a cinematic phenomenological study of existential rights. And I'll tell you about this in a minute, but just to let you know where she is, she's now at University of West Georgia, one of my alma maters, and she teaches courses in liberation psychology, creativity, phenomenological research. She works with research that turns into social advocacy or is social advocacy. She founded the Phenomenological Film Collective, where she works with the intersection of phenomenology and film, which is central to her dissertation. And she's active in Squip and is publishing wonderful work. And the dissertation was a step towards what she's doing now and what she's carrying further. As I reflected on her dissertation and the ceremony today, it just hit me so strongly that we live in a wounded world. And because it's wounded, it wounds us in turn. And yet it's a glorious world too. And Nisha's dissertation addressed both of these dimensions in really beautiful and really painful ways. The anthropologist Ruth Behar says research that doesn't break your heart just isn't worth doing anymore. And Nisha's research is heartbreaking, but it's also heart-opening. She interviewed gay men about being in the closet and really wanted to get a sense of the felt sense of this traumatic, but at times liberating experience for these men. And she did a qualitative study. She started with a phenomenological hermeneutical method, much like what we at Duquesne have been doing for years and folks around the country, around the world have been doing for years, really interviewing these men and carefully interpreting their testimony about their experience, and came up with some amazing findings. You know, for any ordinary study, that would be wonderful. But Nisha's wasn't an ordinary study. So what she did was, as she was crafting her interpretive findings, hermeneutic findings, she was also beginning to make a film that conveyed these men's experience, so that this film served in two really quite exquisite ways. One is that in making the film, it illuminated things that weren't evident in her original hermeneutic phenomenology. And the hermeneutic phenomenology, of course, informed the making of the film. So this intertwined complementary pairing of methods deepened her understanding, which was beautiful. But then comes the matter of how to share your findings. And along with being able to present at conferences and publish papers, she made this amazing film that I hope you see sometime, really displaying the depth of the anguish and the joy in these men's lives. And so it's really an amazing dissertation. So I'm happy to celebrate it today.
Thank you so much, Will. I didn't expect to feel so emotional hearing that, but I do, and I have the award right here. Much appreciated. I did write a little something, so I'm going to share it. I'm really honored to receive this award. They say it takes a village to raise a child. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you to Dr. Adams. I should also say to Dr. Ava Sims and Dr. Elizabeth Fine, who are here with us in the ceremony, and my dissertation committee for their heartfelt and continuous mentorship of me and my soul work. To the research participants who shared their beautiful stories for this project, and to the talented cast and crew of Illuminate for helping me birth this film to life. You can watch it at illuminatethecloset.com. And I do want to say to Division 5, thank you for standing in solidarity with researchers who are fighting for liberation. Thank you.
Congratulations to our dissertation award winners. I'd like to call up, we're moving to our early career award winners. I'd like to call up Sunil Bhatia to present the Early Career Award in Qualitative Inquiry to Urmitapa Duda.
Hi, Urmita.
Hi, Sunil.
Okay, so once again, it's a real great honor for me to present this award to Urmitapa. I'm going to read some excerpts from the letter that I wrote to nominate her for the Early Career Contribution to Qualitative Inquiry Award. So let me start by saying that I believe Dr. Datta is one of those rare young scholars who's not just contributing new knowledge to the field of psychology, but instead she's someone who's remapping the boundaries of qualitative inquiry and raising new fundamental questions about dominant ways of thinking and theorizing in social sciences. Undoubtedly, Dr. Datta's scholarship elevates the intellectual discourse in qualitative inquiry, community psychology, critical cultural studies, and youth studies. Dr. Datta has laid an impressive and solid research foundation as an assistant professor at University of Massachusetts at Lowell, and she's unquestionably become a well-reputed international scholar and activist. Her approach to ethnographic research is interdisciplinary and is grounded in her experience of growing up in Northeast India, a region that's been mired in ethnic conflict and chronic violence for several decades. This culturally diverse region has been impacted by sustained bouts of violence and neglect from the state and has been a site where a large number of the population have experienced human rights violation, racism, and extreme marginality. Dr. Datta's prolific research aims to reframe the conflict in Northeast of India through a social justice lens, and one of her primary goals is to connect individual psychology, oppression, and agency to larger sociopolitical structures of the state. Her research is deeply humane and goes a long way in addressing the deep inequities and injustices that youth have experienced in Northeast India. The Northeast of India has also been left out of the larger narrative of progress and development that's been enacted by the neoliberal reforms of the Indian government. While Dr. Datta's research is based on the conceptual frameworks offered in youth studies and community psychology, the implications of interdisciplinary scholarship is far-reaching and very relevant to qualitative psychology and inquiry. There are actually three broad areas of Datta's scholarship that are cutting-edge, innovative, and speak to the current youth movements in Black Lives Matter and Dalit social movements. First, her research, as I said, stems out of her doctoral dissertation. It's located in the Garo Hills. Second, her scholarship also reveals the site of resistance and everyday peace building possibilities that youth and families undertake to counter the sustained ethnic violence in Garo Hills. Dr. Datta is extremely skillful and knowledgeable in using participatory research methods to involve the diverse local youth in Garo Hills in projects of civic engagement, dialogue, and providing them with the space and language to offer counter-narratives of state-based discourses of ethnicity, tribal identities, and military-based counter-insurgency operations. The third area that Dr. Datta's qualitative research program focuses on pertains to understanding how the dominant discourses of masculinity shape the everyday construction of gender and ethnic conflict in Garo Hills. In my mind, this is one of the most promising areas for research in psychology because it brings to fore how young Garo women become casualties of this recurring ethnic conflict in Northeast and how their identity and subjectivity is shaped by patriarchal power and an intimidating masculine public discourse. Research and theory conducted in post-colonial settings, or rather any settings, needs to be vigilant and self-reflexive about how our axis of race, class, and gender informs the theory and research process. What I found really brilliant and insightful in Dr. Datta's scholarship is that she speaks about the risk of epistemic violence that's caused by describing the participants as native subjects, the misguided search for the apparent or authentic or exotic account of pure insiders or local people, and the intellectual and political location in which we identify our research. And Dr. Datta's qualitative research is attentive to all three dimensions of knowledge production, and her research demonstrates very vividly how important it is to acknowledge how one's politics of location shapes the research process. And finally, I'll just conclude by saying that Dr. Datta's publications are also involved immigrant youth and youth of color, and she shows how they offer critical conceptualization of inequities, underscoring how racism, high-stakes testing, disinvestment in public schools, gang violence, gentrification, and law enforcement are implicated in everyday violence. So what I found really terrific and amazing about Dr. Urmitappa's research is the transnational connections she makes between Garo Hills in northeastern India, as well as in a local community where she resides, working for the rights of Black youth, brown youth, and these connections that she makes are between these two sites, so to speak, of qualitative methods, is what makes her research really unique. She's prolific, dedicated qualitative researcher, compassionate, young activist scholar who has much to offer to the field and the community and our community of qualitative psychology. And I really look forward to her contributions in the future. And it's again an honor for me to be able to nominate and to celebrate the getting of this award to Urmitappa.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It is indeed an honor for me to receive this award, especially from such an esteemed colleague and dear friend, Sunil. I do want to acknowledge that although the award is an individual one, the work behind it is not. It's not my alone. It's always done as a collective and in community with people who are at the front lines of social justice movements. This award also means a lot to me because, for me, qualitative inquiry is so much about storytelling, about creating spaces for stories that resist dehumanization, oppression, and injustice. And that feels more pertinent in today's world than ever before. So this award also feels like such an act of solidarity. So thank you so much, everyone.
I'd like to now invite Dr. Elizabeth Fine to the stage to present to Eva Marie Sims, the distinguished, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I'm gonna go back. I'd like to invite Dr. David Weiss to the stage to present to Shen Wang the Anne Anastasi Early Career Award.
Thank you.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, John. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to present this award to my esteemed colleague, Chun Ma. I think it's particularly appropriate that she receives the Anastasi Award because Anastasi, I recall her from my younger days, was always interested in measurement, and Chun is focused, one of the few modern day psychometricians who is focused almost exclusively on the field of measurement as the field of psychometrics has morphed into more applied statistics. Chun has managed to maintain that focus, and I hope she will continue for the next 30 or 40 years, at least. Anyway, by way of background, I want to tell you a little bit about Chun and why I nominated her for this award. Chun received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Peking University a few years back. And then she went to the University of Illinois, where she worked with Wawa Chang, who is in his own right an outstanding researcher in the field of cognitive diagnostic testing and computerized adaptive testing and other applications of measurement. While Chun was at Illinois, she received a master's degree in statistics and finished her PhD in 5 years, including the master's degree of statistics, in 2012. We were fortunate at the University of Minnesota to snatch her up just when she finished her degree. And she was with us for 5 years. At the end of year 4, we proposed her for early tenure, and she received that at the end of 5 years. And she stayed with us as an associate professor for 1 year, and then for family reasons, moved to the University of Washington in 2018, where she is currently an associate professor in their quantitative methods program. I've been advising graduate students at the University of Minnesota for over 50 years and have never seen a student who is as productive and focused as Chun Wang. She has an amazing record, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that record. As a graduate student, Chun published 8 papers, which is in itself unusual, but 3 of those papers were in Psychometrica, which is the most difficult journal to publish in for a psychometrician. Subsequent to finishing her degree, she published in the Journal of Educational and Behavioral Statistics, Journal of Educational Statistics, Applied Psychological Measurement, Education and Psychological Measurement, Journal of Educational Measurement, Multivariate Behavioral Research, British Journal of Mathematical and Statistical Psychology and Behavior Research Methods, plus an additional 8 publications in Psychometrica. So in total, she has 11 publications in Psychometrica. Now, when we had Chun's qualifications sent out for her early promotion to associate professor, one of the reviewers commented that at that time, and that was 4 years ago, she had more publications in Psychometrica than most people have in their entire career. And she's only been in this field for 12 years, including her graduate work. Well, 13 years, including her graduate work. So as of today, she has 58 total publications in that period of time, which is absolutely phenomenal. She has, in addition, received virtually every award that's available as a graduate student. She had 6 awards. She has received awards from the Psychometric Society, NCME, AERA, International Association for Computerized Adaptive Testing. And when she was promoted at the University of Minnesota, she was designated as a McKnight Presidential Fellow, which is a rare award given to very outstanding people. She has 68 peer-reviewed conference papers and 24 invited papers. Has reviewed for 18 journals in the National Science Foundation and is on the editorial board of 4 journals and associate editor for 3 journals, and the chair of the Psychometric Society Editorial Council. I really don't know how she does this. She is incredibly productive and hopefully will continue to be for years. Not only does she have this incredible record of productivity, but the quality of her work is absolutely outstanding. Her specialization, if I had to designate one area of specialization, I would say is multidimensional item response theory. And I see her as the international leader in that field. And that is very broadly defined because she's concerned with longitudinal multidimensional analysis. She's concerned with applying multidimensional IRT to cognitive diagnostic testing. She has applied multidimensional IRT to computerized adaptive testing. She's looked at multidimensional analysis of student growth using IRT, and has worked with other issues such as response time modeling as it relates to test security and as it relates to IRT parameter estimation, among other issues. So she has an extremely broad focus on a whole range of measurement issues. And I heard somebody clear their throat saying that I'm spending too much time, I assume. Anyway, I am honored to have the opportunity to work with Chun Wang and to present her with this award for her absolutely phenomenal contributions to psychological measurement.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Dave. And I do have my award here. I did receive it. And I'm really honored to receive this award. And thank you so much, Dave, for nominating me. And thank you, the award committee, for selecting me. So Dave is a dear friend and a great mentor to me while I was in Minnesota, and it's the person I missed the most after leaving Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that we had a number of committees reviewing these awards separately, and all the committees were just so impressed and thrilled. And hearing these presentations, it reminds me of that feeling again, of just how impressive these dissertation award winners and early career award winners are, just phenomenal scholars. At this point, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Fine to the stage. We're moving on to the Distinguished Contribution Awards, and she'll be presenting the Distinguished Contribution Award in Teaching and Mentoring in Qualitative Inquiry to Eva Marie Sims.
Wonderful. So I'm so honored to present this award for distinguished contributions in teaching and mentorship in qualitative inquiry to my friend and colleague, Eva Marie Sims, and to take up the impossible task of introducing her and her work in just a few minutes. So in her over 20 years of teaching and mentorship in the Duquesne University Department of Psychology, Eva has guided generations of undergraduate and graduate students through transformational experiences in qualitative inquiry. I'm going to focus here on her teaching and her mentorship, but these are inextricable from the spaces and places she's touched in other ways, through her scholarship, through her community engagement. 5 years ago, Dr. Sims was awarded the Adrian Van Kam Endowed Chair in Scholarly Excellence in recognition of her community engaged research. She's the author of The Child in the World, Embodiment, Time, and Language in Early Childhood, as well as numerous book chapters and articles related to phenomenology, feminist philosophies, children's experiences, and the intersection of place, space, nature, and justice. So the role of qualitative methods in undergraduate psychology curriculum is something that we talk and think about a lot here in the division. And so I really wanted to point out how lucky our undergraduates have been. Dr. Sims has provided numerous whole cohorts of undergraduate students with direct experience conducting meaningful, community-engaged qualitative research. 10 years ago, she designed and inaugurated the undergraduate course Psychology of Community Engagement, a capstone class that's required of all psychology majors at Duquesne. So just to give an example, in one recent semester, the students, along with Dr. Sims and her graduate assistant, participated in collaborative interviews with members of a nearby neighborhood who had direct experience of gang-related violence. They read articles on the intersection of race, justice, and spatial environments. They practiced their interview skills. They went through training and research ethics through the IRB. And then after completing the interviews, the students transcribed them and conducted a basic thematic analysis, collaboratively creating a dramatic retelling of the themes to perform for the interviewees. So this was an incredibly powerful experience for these students, and it's just one example of what this course was over the years. Dr. Sims also teaches qualitative methods on the graduate level through her Advanced Qualitative Methods seminar and her graduate course on the phenomenology of human development. And this has produced a number of published papers by graduate students in the department. So I'd say Dr. Sims' approach to research mentorship teaches existing methodological traditions with depth and rigor, and also supports the development of new and innovative methods. So in her dissertation supervision, especially over its early years, Dr. Sims was working with advisees to integrate feminist cultural hermeneutics into the traditionally male-dominated phenomenological tradition in order to address topics that were deeply embedded in women's lives: menstruation, miscarriage, the termination of wanted pregnancies. In her work with the Merleau-Ponty Circle, she's supported students investigating the pre-verbal dimensions of childhood experience. In the past several years, she's worked with graduate students in the department, including Nisha Gupta, to develop new approaches to eliciting children and youth's experiences of their spaces, their play spaces, the streets where they live, using techniques like photo voice, collaborative mapping, guided walks, and structured observation for engaging communities of all ages in the design of restorative space. But maybe the most significant space for Dr. Sims' teaching and mentorship has been Place Lab, the working group she convened over the past 6 years for students and colleagues interested in working together on community-engaged projects that are situated at the intersection of place, space, and justice. I think Dr. Sims' remarks are going to focus on her Place Lab work, so I won't go into too much detail, but I just want to highlight the wide impact of this work. Place Lab has produced and offered an ongoing series of trainings for community organizations on community trauma and resilience care, and developed many deep and mutually enriching partnerships between Duquesne University and community organizations. At Duquesne, Dr. Sims has been awarded both the McNulty College Award for Excellence in Teaching and the Duquesne University Creative Teaching Award. And I think I can speak for all of us here at Duquesne when I say that we are so happy to see her recognized by Division 5 as well. So, Eva, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. This has been such a great honor. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
It's been such a great honor to receive this award. And I wanted to thank you, Elizabeth, particularly for nominating me, and also Heidi Levitt for organizing all this. And I want to take a little bit of time that has been given to me to talk and share a slide presentation, which is called, hang on a minute, Mentorship and the Freedom of the Other. So I'll share my screen, so it's going to take me just a second to set it up. Okay, hang on a minute. Okay, can you see it, Elizabeth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to talk with you about mentorship and the freedom of the other. And since I've been given this time, about 15, 18 minutes, I really wanted to think about my own experience of being mentored from my early years on, and also what mentorship implies, particularly when mentorship is seen as enhancing the freedom of the other. And I wanted to begin actually, and I want to dedicate these few words today to somebody who I never met. I want to dedicate it to a young girl. Her name was Inge Frank. She was expelled from the school where I was educated and I was not there. This was many years before I was there. In 1938, because she was Jewish, and she was murdered in Samos in 1942. And I did not know this until last week when I began looking at some history about the place where I was educated. So this is what the hallway looked like probably when she was there. This was in Germany during the Nazi years. I entered that school in 1969, and it was interesting. 2 days into the school, we were sitting in a classroom. I'm 10 years old, and a student pokes in her head. She's an upper class woman. It was an all-girls school. You know, I'm a working class kid. I find myself in this school, which was really overwhelming. This girl looks into our classroom, says, "Is the teacher there?" "No." So she comes in and she says, "We are demonstrating today because the treatment of girls in this school is reactionary. We want more freedom. We want a different director, and we're going to take a march through the city." So we marched with them through the city. And it was a watershed in my education. I really briefly wanted to acknowledge my teachers from that time, because after that watershed, I had progressive teachers in an all-girls school, men and women, who were committed to have an education that was an education in democracy and free thinking in the post-fascist German years. They insisted that we become educated in the wider historical context of our lives. And I'm telling you this because these are some of the principles that are rooted in me, that they have instilled in me as an educated person, because they educated me this way. And that is important to me in what I teach my students. So being aware of a historical context. And as Will Adams said earlier, I think in a painful time, a time that hurts us right now, I think this is extremely important to understand ourselves as people within history. They taught us critical and independent thinking. We had to vote on everything. Like, I mean, we voted all the time, which was my German teachers of, the 1970s. They also taught me the importance of history and philosophy, that we need concepts. And I think as qualitative researchers, we need both those things. We need to understand the work that we do within its historical context, and also to have a philosophical sophistication, to have concepts with which we can work with the material that we gather. And they also taught me that questions have power. One of my particular mentors was a history teacher who believed that students could work at the highest level. In his courses, which were very intense, as 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, we did the material that he at this time was doing in his doctoral course in history at the University of Gießen. I did not know that until later when I had a conversation with him after many years later. We engaged with original sources. He had us read Hobbes, he had us read Rousseau, he had us read Marx and Engels, we read Lenin, and studied documents of the Weimar Republic parliamentary debates to understand how fascism came about. And that was an incredible experience for somebody at 17 and 18. He taught us to understand the context, interpretive skills, to value different perspectives, and the teacher as a guide through a field of study, but the students struggle themselves. And I think these are the principles of mentorship, at least as I hold them in general. I'm going to skip this one here for a minute because I wanted to tell you a little bit about Place Lab. Place Lab, as Elizabeth mentioned, is a community engaged research lab where we translate qualitative research, but also quantitative research through literature reviews into products that can be useful for urban communities. Place Lab started out actually as kind of doing a lot more environmental work, but that began to change when I was invited into some African American community work, and place became a very important focus because many places are not safe. So the privilege that many white communities have is that our places are relatively safe, which is often not true for people who live in poverty. So, you know, upon invitation, a lot of these projects kind of evolved over time. So Place Lab consists usually of myself, a number of graduate students. You know, sometimes we have 5, 6 at the table, sometimes more, and also community members that are there at every meeting. So I have tried to make the university open for community members who sit at the table in our seminar rooms, and we work together. One of the products that we created together was actually based on a needs assessment that I did with my undergraduate students. We did a needs assessment with a number of after-school programs who worked with children in urban settings. And the word that was so clearly communicated to us was that they needed more training in trauma and trauma psychology and trauma pedagogy. So I put together a team of people from the community, some social workers, some psychologists, and graduate students, and we created the Community Trauma and Resilience Collaborative Training, which has, you know, run a number of times now, and it lives actually now in a community organization that keeps it alive and moves it. Well, what does this mean for the students? What did they pick up from this? And what did I learn from it too? First of all, it's the application of research skills, the translation of research that we produce at the university into practice, and asking, okay, how can this help? How can this be productive? How can this be used? It is also the application of research and research products to diverse clienteles, and the issues of race and systemic racism are at the center. I mean, there's the constant reflection in my team. How do we collect data? What do we do with them? Who owns it? How do we present it? So, you know, and since we have community members at the table most of the time, I think, you know, those discussions are really fruitful. The students learn facilitation skills in our workshops, program evaluation skills, and, you know, we have also co-produced academic presentations and papers. So this is just one of the projects that grows out of kind of working together with students. And I don't know who said it earlier, but I mean, an award is never just an individual thing. I mean, it belongs really to all of us, to all my students, and the amazing work that they have done. Let me move it on just a little bit. Let me just keep an eye on the time here. I wanted to say a few more things. Another project that my students and I have done, which has led to 2 dissertations, is we have done some phenomenological place studies for schools to help schools their green spaces through a careful process and workshop that teaches them phenomenological observation. And we've done this project actually also with inner city kids. So reading one's place rather than just thinking, I know what should be there, let's just put it on there, is a really powerful way of connecting with place. And I think a model for kind of like a transformation in ego psychology as well. So, you know, Place Lab has been a laboratory for the practical application of the phenomenological method. And we have also developed productive and critical methods for qualitative research with children. And this was usually led by graduate students. So again, to empower graduate students to really kind of reflect and think on what is it that they're wanting to produce, and to be critical about our perspective and come up with kind of creative and very unusual ways of creating and gathering narratives. We've also done some photo voice projects, so I don't want to say much about that. I just wanted to say that one of them was actually led by Nisha Gupta, who won the dissertation award here today. And she did an outstanding job in coordinating a team of graduate students doing a photo voice project that was also a liberation psychology project and teaching them about emotional recognition and the emotional responses to places. One last aspect of PlaceLab, and is PlaceLab Justice. PlaceLab Justice came about because of some violent incidents in our photo voice projects where one of the campers a few months after our project was shot, not killed. And we were asked by community members if we could investigate community violence and community resilience. And out of that came a number of projects. One of them was I was asked halfway into that project if we could help somebody who has been incarcerated as a juvenile lifer without parole, which is now unconstitutional in the United States. And we decided to support him and his sentencing through creating a documentary with a filmmaker from the neighborhood. Christian Nolan is an amazing filmmaker. So we created actually a video that integrated the qualitative research findings and data that we collected with historical background and with some of the legal work that has been done around juvenile justice, as well as the work in adolescent neuroscience, and then the personal story of Keith, the man who was an ex-gang member and has been incarcerated for a very long time. We are also working on supporting his clemency process. So one project kind of leads to another, and the students often take the lead in these things. For example, we work with the Public Defender's Office on issues that have to do with fear of the police. And that is really spearheaded by one of my graduate students. And we're also working on projects that have to do with advocacy for prison reform. So what the students take from it is, that our literature reviews and the literature we have in psychology can be tools for sharing power, for sharing knowledge, and sharing insight. But they have to be given away. We integrate qualitative research projects with non-academic forms of presentation, like the mitigation video we made and an advocacy video. And I think that the students learn that translation into other media and making research practical. And I think they learn a sense of respect for diverse skills and insights and different kinds of knowledge, that children have knowledge of the places where they live. Community members know and have an in-depth knowledge of the culture of their place, the culture of their lives. So it's kind of often very much humbling for us to really hear what is going on in relation to the police. And we're all often just silent around the table and shocked to hear from firsthand from the people that, have agreed just to talk to us, to think with us and to work with us. I think part of what we always are trying to do is to understand systemic justice and build psychological advocacy tools. So that's really all I wanted to say. And I just wanted to thank particularly all my students and community members for really having made my life as a qualitative researcher rich and full and exciting and kind of ready to do some more. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'd like at this point to invite Kevin Grimm to the stage to present to Leona Aiken the Samuel J. Messick Award for Distinguished Scientific Contribution.
Thanks, Heidi. Dr. Dave McKinnon, Dr. Craig Enders, and I nominated Dr. Leona Aiken for the Samuel J. Messick Award for Distinguished Scientific Contribution. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Aiken. Dr. Aiken has had an immense impact on the field of quantitative methods in psychology through her scholarship, her advocacy for quantitative methodology in the psychological sciences, and her training of the next generation of quantitative scientists. In terms of her scholarship, Dr. Aiken's book, Multiple Regression, Testing and Interpreting Interaction, continues to have an extraordinary impact on the day-to-day work of practicing researchers almost 30 years after its publications. However, as significant as her methodological contributions are, they may not be her most important achievements. Dr. Aiken has pushed the entire discipline of quantitative psychology forward in ways that few others have. She has been a relentless advocate for quantitative methods throughout her career, and our field's visibility within the American Psychological Association and beyond owes a great deal to Dr. Aiken's efforts. For example, Dr. Aiken served as the chair of the task force for increasing the number of quantitative psychologists and chaired the committee that spearheaded the creation of psychological methods. In terms of graduate training, Dr. Aiken has also led the development of our quantitative psychology program here at Arizona State University, which has awarded more than 30 PhDs since 2003. I can think of no one who is more deserving of the Samuel J. Messick Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions. Any one of Dr. Aiken's many achievements warrant this prestigious honor, and the sum total of her influence on the field of quantitative psychology is truly remarkable. Dr. Aiken, I'll turn it over to you.
Kevin, thank you for that introduction. I'm really more than touched. And here is the wonderful plaque that will hang in my office to remind me on my dark days that maybe my parents would have been pleased with me. I'm gonna set up my talk now. Oops. That's a surprise. I hope I can get this to work. There it is. Can you hear me? Am I on? Hello?
You're doing great.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So
I can't see. Do you have a presentation to share?
It's not showing. Okay, so yes, I do, but I've done something wrong. So we're going to have a little technical pause for a minute, and I'm going to have to do something. Tell me to start.
Okay, begin.
Okay, first I'd like to thank Kevin, who has been a wonderful colleague, came in the last years, just before I retired, and has really taken the quantitative program forward since he's been here. I want to thank my letter writers, Dave McKinnon and Craig Enders, for taking the time and being willing to write on my behalf. I want to thank the awards committee. Heidi Levitt has been a great Zoom coach for me. And I want to thank the scientific subcommittee, Rich Gonzalez, Rochelle Michael, and Ken Kelly for choosing me. I'm really humbled by this award. I'm going to start with a bit of my personal history. This is me as a senior undergraduate in the Richmond Civic Ballet Company, dressed as Princess Aurora for Sleeping Beauty, in which life I thought I did college, as I should, but I lived ballet. Nonetheless, I went to graduate school in psychology and there fell in love with two things, statistics and pattern perception. And people have often asked, how could statistics become a passion after ballet? And the truth is I always relished geometry. And ballet has incredible geometry, as does a whole discipline of statistics. And I show you an autoregressive matrix and something from Act 2 of Swan Lake. So I fell in love, as I lost ballet, I fell in love with the geometry of statistics and also with pattern perception. And it's a tribute to my mentors, Donald Brown in pattern psychophysics and my informal mentor, Ben Weiner in statistics, that I made that transition. I took no fewer than 3 semesters of analysis of variance from the classic Ben Weiner Statistical Principles in Experimental Design book, and then taught ANOVA and regression at Temple University in Philadelphia. I collected 3 frequently asked questions from all of the teaching. 1, is there a way to interpret interactions in multiple regression like we can in ANOVA? 2, when I rescale my variables, like from raw scores to deviation scores, why do all the coefficients in the regression analysis change and which are the right ones? And then the usual, how many subjects do I have to run to get a significant interaction? In 84, 85, I was in leave at Arizona State University, and my goal was to deal with these frequently asked questions. I started by calling on the Cohen and Cohen regression books to say what we got to do first is be able to picture the continuous variable interaction. And following Jacob Cohen and others said, we will rearrange the regression equation to show the regression of y on one focal variable x as a function of the other variable, the moderator z. And then we can plot the interaction for the continuous variables in a way that will inform us as well as plotting these in ANOVA. Oh dear, one more. The next step was to provide a general expression for the standard error of the simple slope of y on x as a function of z, which turned out to be a quadratic form. And that led to us to be able to do t-tests for the significance of individual regression slopes to answer over what range of the interaction surface is the regression of y on x different from 0. And this strategy of testing allowed us to not only talk about what the interaction looked like, but also levels of significance. Remember, this is back in 1990, late 80s and 90s. We haven't had the big issue about significance at this point. The next step was to do for regression analysis what people have done in the ANOVA books is to take more and more complex regression equations and figure out how to characterize and illustrate and test the interactions, which I did with a series of linear by linear equations and then a series of equations that had quadratic terms and interactions with quadratic terms. So that took care of, can we test interactions in regression like we can in ANOVA? The next question was to deal with the predictor scaling, which we know if we have experience in regression with interactions is that if you change the scale of your variable from raw scores to deviation scores, all the coefficients in the regression equation change except for the highest order interaction, which is unnerving because in this example, the regression of y on z goes from steeply negative to steeply positive when you scale the data. So what does this all mean? And I thought about scaling and started looking at what is referred to as centering, putting scores in deviation form, until I could show algebraically for my own satisfaction and then geometrically why the changing coefficients was taking place. So that took care of part 2. For question number 3, how many subjects do I need to run? I did a power analysis of the two-phi interaction in this regression equation as a function of variance accounted for by the first order effects, the correlation between x and z, the interaction effects, size, the reliability of x, the reliability of z, and therefore the reliability of the cross product term. And bottom line is one can need very large sample sizes in order to detect interactions in regression. I was at Arizona State University. I incidentally married Steve West, colleague, in 1987. He joined me in this project and did the writing on categorical about continuous variable interactions. And we published this book in 1991 instead of having a child. The next thing that happened was Jacob Cohen came to Stephen and myself and asked us if we would join him and his wife, Patricia Cohen, on the 3rd edition of their Bible of regression, multiple regression. And we were honored and daunted. Our assignment from Jacob Cohen was to update existing material and to add new topics. And so I updated curvilinear relationships and interactions and wanted to study generalized linear model and multi-level model, so chose those chapters to write. Now, this is a 12-year span from the appearance of the books. And in that time, and more recently, I've continued to work in interactions. The next thing I took on was with Ida Kraft and Jan DeLeo at UCLA on centering in multi-level models. Whether you center, if we have groups of data, do you use the means of the groups? Do you center for each group? Which would be to say, how does this child relate in ability to the other kids in his classroom versus at the grand mean, how does this kid achievement relate to the total group of children under study, and so on and so forth. It was very complicated and unclear at the time we worked on this, and we published an article on this in Multivariate Behavior Research in 1995. I then did some writing on the graphical displays of interactions, on generalized linear model and interactions in generalized linear models, and then moved to generalized linear mixed models with group structure, particularly emphasizing counts because much more had been written on binary variables and logistic regression, and finally joined as a trailing author on work on alternative tests of simple slopes that take into account sampling variance in the mean of X and the mean of Z by which we center. An exciting thing that was going on in our own department in 1995 is that the department chair charged us to write a proposal for a quantitative PhD program. We finished it in 1995, and then it made its way up through the college and the graduate college and the provost office and on until it was approved by the Arizona Board of Regents in April of 1998, which is sort of an exception because usually a new specialty within a department doesn't get that far. So I never understood why that happened. Anyway, it was my privilege to chair that program for the majority of the years between 1998 and 2017, with help of my colleagues in years that I was on sabbatical. And then in 2017, my then new colleague, Kevin Grimm, came on as chair and has been really taking the program forward. And I'll tell you, a great joy of my career is to be in a program where we are collectively training the next generation of quantitative methodologists. Here is the vertical decollage of the program. You have the rack of the retired in generation 1. The generation 1.5s are sort of not old enough to be generation 1s and not young enough to be Kevin Grimm and Mike Edwards generation 2. And then the new babies, two incredible young quantitative people who've come in the past few years. Our department, as you can see, has been enormously supportive of this program. Having a program like this brings marvelous quantitative students from around the world. And I chaired or co-chaired dissertations with these 3 women who've gone on with their quantitative careers. And while all this was going on, I had a whole other research side, and that was a research program in women's health. I was interested in the adoption and maintenance of health protective behavior with a focus on intervention. And the overarching goal of my program was really strongly methodological. In health psychology, you see all these kind of sketchy drawings that says, well, norms and attitudes and knowledge and fear all come together to affect the adoption and maintenance of health protective behavior. What we did in the program, myself and my students, was to translate these health behavior models into multiple component interventions, where components reflected these theoretical ideas, and to implement randomized trials in such a way that we could, after the fact, work on analysis to try to understand how the components of the intervention worked or failed to work, or even in 1 or 2 cases were toxic and discouraged people. I wrote a number of pieces saying that this kind of empirical strategy that we were taking could inform health behavior theory rather than the usual thinking that the theory informs of the empirical investigation. With my students, and here's an article with 3 of them, we took on problems in health psychology research. One is the problem of how do you measure perceived risk for a disease? Do I ask you, as you sit here today, how at risk do you feel for developing COVID-19? and you're asked to rate yourself. That's an absolute judgment. However, I can ask you, thinking of your peers who are in the same age group and the same gender and have similar lifestyles, how at risk are you for getting COVID-19? The problem is that in health psychology, those two classes of items, which had enormously different cognitive processes to answer, were being combined and averaged in the same scale. So we wrote a lot about that. I had been interested for some time in the design and evaluation of interventions and had written about effect size estimates from different ways of measuring change, from treatment effect estimates in true and quasi-experimental designs, particularly the regression discontinuity design, and work on how one goes about designing and then creating interventions in which you can probe individual components, as we were doing in that program research. Here are my social health students. Now, most all of them doing intervention research at major universities. And I want to say that characteristic of our department, all of them trained extensively in quantitative methods in the quant program. And some of them are teaching graduate level quantitative courses as well as functioning as social psychological health researchers. Now, I have the strong feeling that quantitative psychologists have responsibility to teach quantitative methods to a broad audience to improve research. It's not all about developing methods, it's about teaching well. And I've been very grateful to have been recognized for my teaching for many, many years. I thank Division 5 for granting me the inaugural Jacob Cohen Award for Teaching and Mentoring in Quantitative Psychology in 2001. And I want to mention 3 awards for which my students were absolutely the inspiration. The number 1 was the Outstanding Graduate Mentor in graduate school and from the Graduate College. And here are my students around me that came for the celebration. The Parents Association of Arizona State University chose me as Professor of the Year the next year. And the Office of the President granted me the name title of President's Professor the year after that. So this was quite a run, to which I give my students credit for the inspiration and for the work with me. Now, quantitative psychologists, I firmly believe, need to have an ongoing dialogue with a broad field of psychology and not be siloed in our own quiet little world. And my view of a way to do that was to put articles about quantitative methods and quantitative training in the American Psychologist, the flagship journal of the American Psych Association. In 2 articles, one in 1990 and then a follow-up in 2008, I and my colleagues surveyed over 220 graduate programs in North America and asked what the quantitative training was in each of the areas of psychology represented in that department. In 1990, we made big note about the apparent death of measurement in quantitative methods. And we're glad to see an increase in return to training in quantitative methods over that 18-year gap. I also became involved with people interested in the undergraduate psychology curriculum and focused on the methodology component of undergraduate curriculum. We published another article in American Psychologist in 2016. And now I'm part of a group that Joe Rogers, a very recent, who's president of Division 5, I think in 2017, pulled together to discuss how we should be revising and innovating in the teaching of undergraduate methods. Their book is coming out, edited by Joe Rogers, which should be out this month with Taylor and Francis. And most of the chapters are focused on creative things we could do to revise and innovate in the curriculum. I said, I want to take the workforce picture, which is to take 2 years database of all the job ads from the American Psychological Society, APS, and analyze precisely who is being hired, who has undergraduate statistics in their teaching portfolio. And it is a far cry from the innovator possibility. Now, I also engaged in professional leadership. I really like it. And I saw that I could accomplish things that I really valued this way. So I was president of Division 5 in Western Psych Association and the Society for Multivariate Behavioral Research. And this gives you platforms from which to speak about the level of quantitative psychology. I counted on my CV that I was a member of 23 boards and committees of APA in 15 years. And I want to tell you my favorite projects. Kevin has mentioned leading the charge with APA to get psychological methods as a journal in the APA portfolio. I was a member of the APA Task Force on Significance Testing. We published an article in the American Psychologist in 1999 that made the strong guidelines for reporting of effect sizes. In teaching, while I was president of Western Psych Association, instead of using my 8 hours of programming in the usual way of inviting speakers, I said we're going to have 4 2-hour quantitative workshops, and we're going to bring in really good people, and they're going to teach and give materials out. Now, I started that in 2002, and it's still going 17 years later, long after I'm no longer active in the Western Psych Association. And finally, Kevin mentioned that I have been always concerned about the pipeline of quantitative psychologists, getting young and talented people, not only psych majors, but maybe math majors, other people, into our field to study for the PhD. And so I was able to get funding from the APA Council to have a task force that was able to come together twice in Washington, DC, to figure out how to increase the pipeline of quantitative psychologists. This resulted in a section of the web on the American Psych Association website. And I will tell you from just watching our own applications and people who have come to our program, is people go to that site to this day to look and to learn about what is quantitative psychology, and often to join departments across the country. Okay, so that's a quick look at my love affair with quantitative psychology. I hope I have produced new knowledge that's useful to the field. And I hope of my teaching of quantitative methods for almost half a century, actually 49 years, has been effective. I hope that my ongoing dialogue with colleagues in the substantive areas of psychology about quantitative research methods have been fruitful. And finally, I have one more person to thank, and that is my husband, and that is my husband, Steve West, who is my collaborator and my husband for over 3 decades. He has supported me in all things. And Stephen, thank you. And thank you all. And that's it. I am done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm going to try shopping. Stop sharing.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Congratulations. What a wonderful.
Thank you.
So now I have the honor of inviting Ruth Ellen Josselson to present the distinguished contributions in qualitative inquiry.
Thank you, Heidi. And I'm delighted, thrilled to be presenting the Distinguished Contributions in Qualitative Inquiry Award to Heidi Levitt. And I should start by saying that Heidi, who is chairing this whole awards session and committee, had absolutely nothing to do with this. We chose our awardee completely independent of her, and she is so humble that when she heard that she had been given the award, she said, well, I think I should defer because I'm chairing the whole awards thing. And we adamantly refused because she clearly is the most deserving person of this award. And so, so we said, we want to give it to you, even if you are in this other role. So I hope that that's really clear to everybody, that she is a unanimous choice of the Qualitative Awards Committee. And one of the reason that we chose her as the awardee for the distinguished contributions in qualitative inquiry this year is that she has been at the forefront in defining and refining the standards for qualitative research. I have a memory of her back in, I think it was 2013, Heidi, I'm not sure, but we were at APA in Hawaii when Heidi, at a Society for Qualitative Inquiry meeting, really articulated the long-standing concerns voiced by many qualitative researchers that during the journal review process, their manuscripts were often inappropriately evaluated according to standards that are more suited to quantitative research. And this was, of course, terribly frustrating to them. Having already produced a draft of a paper on the idea of developing a single conceptual framework to address rigor in qualitative research, Heidi took up the challenge of chairing a task force on resources for the publication of qualitative research. While the articulation of a set of criteria and standards for producing and evaluating qualitative research might at first glance appear to be a straightforward task, the diversity of methodologies and accompanying ontologies and epistemologies that comprise qualitative research make it nothing short of a daunting task. Some would even say an impossible task. However, under Heidi's leadership, the members of the task force forged ahead and persisted, even in the face of considerable criticism about the wisdom and feasibility of such an undertaking. In trying to accommodate the diversity of qualitative inquiry, Heidi consulted broadly with qualitative researchers, took their feedback to heart, and worked extremely hard to produce a document that recognizes and incorporates the sometimes conflicting positions and practices of qualitative inquiry. And I think that all of you can see the kind of diligence that she's capable of just by looking at how she's organized this session today with those amazing pictures of how the Zoom looks and getting us all together. I mean, she is absolutely amazing in her organizational and integrative abilities. And what Heidi did with her task force did in this paper is focused on the concept of methodological integrity and its instantiation via two higher order processes. One is the fidelity to the subject matter, and the other is utility in achieving research goals. Heidi and her team endeavored to recognize both commonalities and differences among qualitative methodologies. The outcome of this effort is that she became the lead author of an article in 2017 published in Qualitative Psychology, which is entitled Recommendations for Designing and Reviewing Qualitative Research in Psychology, Promoting Methodological Integrity. This paper defined methodological integrity and has become a widely cited standard for qualitative research and was sent to all editors of APA journals with the encouragement that people adhere to it. This effort on Mass Task Force was followed by her leadership of the APA Task Force that resulted in publication in the American Psychologist of the journal article Reporting Standards for Qualitative Research in Psychology. This article became foundational to the inclusion of these standards in the newest APA publication manual, a project that she also led. So you couldn't really have more influence than that. These contributions are highly distinguished. Their recommendations have been adopted in many other countries as well as the US, and they will continue to influence qualitative psychology for decades to come. In addition, Dr. Levitt has been a highly productive scholar whose exemplary work has set the standards for qualitative inquiry. She has published 130 refereed journal articles or book chapters, most of them either using or discussing qualitative methods. One of my personal favorites is an article that she did that was published with others, that was published in the Psychological Bulletin, which was a very thoughtful meta-analysis of qualitative studies of clients' experiences of psychotherapy. I assign this article to all of my students. In order to advance qualitative methods, Heidi has also created numerous webinars and podcasts to make these methods accessible to students and newer researchers. She has also taken up leadership roles as Associate Editor of Qualitative Psychology and as President of the Society for Qualitative Inquiry in Psychology, the section of Division 5. I have 3 very long and detailed letters of support for her nomination for this award, all attesting to her, quote, substantial impacts both on the use of qualitative inquiry to further knowledge in substantive areas and on the development of good practices in the undertaking of such inquiry. Another letter writer averred that she is, quote, without peer, the international authority on qualitative research. I would concur with that assessment, and I am delighted and honored to presenting her this well-deserved award.
Thank you. I feel so moved. Thank you so much, Rivelin, for that really lovely speech. And I have my award. I too wanted to share some slides with you all, and we'll do that now. And my talk is entitled The Reasons Underlying Research Design Decisions, Developing Methodological Integrity. And before I begin, I wanted to pay a short tribute to, I've had the privilege of having many important mentors in my life, but the one who really encouraged me and talked to me and supported my interest in methods specifically was David Rennie, who introduced and popularized grounded theory methods in psychology and focused in his scholarship on core processes that underlie qualitative analysis. And so this was very influential for me. He passed on in 2013, which was the same year as that fateful APA meeting that Rivelin just mentioned, where I began getting involved in SQUIP. And did so in part because of these issues in the field that were going on that she was just alluding to. There was a shift happening where more and more people were becoming familiar with qualitative methods or perspectives, but still not really having the depth of understanding that allows them to review across methods or perspective. Another issue that was happening was that journals' positions on qualitative research, whether they would publish it or not, could shift dramatically when editors shifted. And this became very difficult for qualitative researchers to know how to go ahead and how to publish, especially if reviewers were only familiar with one set of procedures or one method, or even one method located within one epistemological approach or perspective. And so I was really thrilled in talking with SQUIP that they were interested in supporting this task force that I chaired that would respond to this growing tendency by reviewers to assess methods by seeing how well do they replicate the procedures that were used when the method was first developed. And so there were these different sorts of structural checklists that were being put forward for teaching and reviewing, where people would check off to see if the procedures that are associated with a certain methods were used and adhered to. And there were problems with this kind of structural approach. One, it really restricted the flexibility of researchers and kept them from applying methods in creative and appropriate ways to different subject matters or traditions than the original researchers had been focused upon. It led to very inconsistent expectations for reviews, because while one reviewer may be familiar with one set of standards, another would be familiar with another, and often it reduced methods to just one variant. And when I joined Division 5 and started becoming more and more involved, I attended the conference that Leon Aiken just referred to, Joe Rogers' conference on teaching statistics, and the common rejoinder across was that these cookbook approaches to teaching statistics are problematic, that we want statisticians, we want methodologists to go beyond checklists and cookbooks to really be thinking about the principles that underlie the selection of methods and procedures. So our goal was, how do we articulate a rationale for the adaptation of methods that can be recruited by authors and used to evaluate work while supporting flexibility? And to be clear, our concern wasn't to get rid of procedure or to reject methods, which are often really helpful and necessary and useful in learning, but to highlight what are the underpinning rules that led to the development of a method in that way, so that they could be adapted appropriately when applied to different sorts of questions and subjects. And I was thrilled to have phenomenal colleagues working with me on this task force. And through this 4-year process, revising, I think it was almost 15 drafts of this paper in consultation with many leading qualitative researchers of many different stripes, we developed this concept of methodological integrity, which was put forward as the methodological basis of trustworthiness and a way of understanding rigor in qualitative methods, focusing on the logic underpinning the selection of its procedures. And so at the core, the premise was that procedures might need to be altered depending on researchers' epistemological perspectives and goals. So if your goal is to create a measure or to stimulate social change or to create a deep understanding of a construct for clinicians, you would want to select the methods and procedures that would really help you to further those specific goals. Procedures may need to be altered depending on subject matter. So for instance, my dissertation was focused on silences. At that time, a lot of the literature studying silences in psychotherapy simply tabulated all silences together and summed them, how many seconds of silences were there in a session, and then looked at them in relationship to outcomes like alliance or depression reduction or things like that. But we found that the literature was incredibly mixed. For every session, every study you could find that was saying silence is good, there was one saying silence was bad. And so my dissertation looked and developed a qualitative understanding of the different types of silence that need to be studied individually. And although I used grounded theory, which typically has a core category, I argued that there should be no core category because there is no core here. So, so thinking about methods that may be quite established in a certain way being completely adapted because they don't fit the subject matter. Participants, methods may need to be adapted because you may be, as a researcher, part of a community that you're investigating. That may change how you go about the investigation. Or you may be an outsider and that might present different challenges. You may have interviewees that are more or less verbal or comfortable with self-expression or feeling like they can take risks in being involved in the research, and that also might lead to different sorts of methodological procedures being used. So as Ruthella mentioned, our model really revolved around these two central kinds of topics, this two central ideas, fidelity and utility. And within each, there were 4 different components, 2 focused more on data collection and 2 focused more on analysis. That helped to spell this out. And I'm going to go through this kind of briefly just to show you the general idea. But in the paper that we wrote, there's lots of details and there's principles laid out for applying these concepts in both research design and research review. So seeking fidelity to a subject is this idea that as qualitative researchers, we're interested in creating data that portrays or creates a clear and vivid portrayal. We want to really present an understanding of the phenomenon that we're studying that readers will understand and that will come across in a clear kind of way. We want to do this regardless of the way that phenomenon is conceived. So if I'm studying a construct that I see as constructed, like in some of my research, I study lesbian gender, I study butch lesbian gender, for instance, or trans lesbian gender. If I understand butch lesbian gender as being something that has a socially constructed component, I want to portray it in a way that that constructive process is evident and that it's clear and that it seems to represent and hold to the kinds of practices and ways that that is experienced as a gender within that community. And I wanted to describe it with boundaries so that people have a sense of, well, when does this, what makes this but gender and what makes it not, right? So this is the core idea of fidelity. And there's 4 concepts that that carry across this within the research process that researchers often consider, that we discuss. One being the idea of adequacy of data, and researchers often think about, how do I obtain data that has the diversity needed in order to clarify differences in the phenomenon that are most relevant to the characteristics of the subject matter at hand. So as a qualitative researcher, the N, the number of participants, isn't the thing that determines adequacy of data, but more, how does the understanding of the data contribute to our understanding of this phenomenon? And do I have diversity within my data that helps to make a contribution to the field? And there's a lot more on that. I just, for qualitative psychology, have an article in press now on generalization, which I'm really excited about, for a special issue that's forthcoming there that talks a lot about just this concept. Management researcher's perspective in data collection. As a researcher doing qualitative work, I want to be really clear of about what my perspective is, and I write about that in my articles. And I want to be clear about that, whether I have direct experience myself with the phenomenon, whether I don't, how does that influence my conceptualizations of the phenomenon, how I go about collecting the data. And then also in analysis, thinking about how my perspective might influence my analytic process. It might be that I'm able to become very aware of my perspective, so I'm able to kind of set it aside and really hear what my participants are saying and integrate and work with that. It might be that I have a theory that I'm using as a lens to help increase my perspicacity, so I'm better able to see patterns in the data that I'm studying. Whichever way I'm managing my perspective, I want to be transparent about it. And so this is one of the recommendations that will enhance fidelity. And then groundedness. Qualitative researchers, qualitative research reports are often entail many quotations, and this is evidence that the findings are rooted in an understanding of the data. So this is thinking through what the idea of fidelity. Thinking through utility. Utility is this concept, the second core concept in methodological integrity, which is focused on the idea that our findings, our contribution should be insightful. They should move the field forward. They should lead us to a better understanding, or they should move us towards more security in our understandings. And in qualitative research, because there are so many different approaches and goals that people bring to their work, there are many different ways of understanding utility. So utility could be clinical utility. It could be that you're clarifying a social process. It could be the development of hypotheses. It could be inciting social change. And so as we thought about what are these underlying processes, we have to think about how do these apply to many different goals that qualitative researchers have. And there were 4 elements here as well. One, that we want the data to be catalysts for insight. So thinking, for instance, these are all here principles. I'll give you an example. Thinking through who your interviewers are, who would be the best interviewer to bring forth insight, comfort, disclosure in the population that you're studying. And that would be very different if you're interviewing religious leaders or if you're interviewing people who are in rock bands, right? How do you approach, how do you frame your questions? These are all things that are important to think through. Data being contextualized. So as you're presenting qualitative research and as you're analyzing it, keeping in mind what is the contextual information, being clear in the study, the context, the time, the space, the place where data was collected, so that findings can be meaningfully evaluated and also transferred appropriately to other contexts. Qualitative research should produce meaningful contributions. So feedback can be helpful, not necessary, but can be helpful. as one way of checking to see, is this meaningful for the people who may be using this research? But there may be many ways of establishing that you've made a meaningful contribution in your writing. And coherence between meanings. Often qualitative researchers, when I'm supervising student projects, they'll come with me and they'll say, well, I'm studying this experience or this identity, and there's one set of findings that say this identity is good and one that says this identity is bad. And that would be not very useful for people reading it. They won't know how to apply it. So you have to figure out a way of making coherence between that conflict. So in what ways are they good and what ways are they bad, or when are they good, or if, depending on what, are they good or are they bad? And so really thinking through, how do you present qualitative research in a way that it can be have maximum utility and be useful for readers. So what's, I think, important here is that these concepts aren't ones that are procedurally based. They're not telling people what they should do as researchers, but they're articulating and creating forward a rationale for why you should think, how you should think about what you should do, how you should adapt procedures. So if I want to maximize the potential for my data to be insightful, I may decide to use different procedures. Or if I'm thinking through, how do I maximize coherence between my meanings when I have two different sets of participants saying different things, that may push me to change the methods that I'm using. And so these elements are all there to articulate these underlying concepts in order to create more flexibility in our methods and more of a clear rationale. I was incredibly honored to be invited to chair the APA Reporting Standards Task Force and to produce, along with Ruth Ellen and others in that task force, the standards for qualitative, qualitative analyses, qualitative meta-analyses, and mixed methods. And this is the inaugural set of reporting standards that is now in the new version of the APA publication manual, and also led to this publication in the American Psychologist. I think the most exciting part of this for me was when I received a phone call from Ruth Ellen at some early point in the morning saying that she heard that this was, and it turned out that it was, although we were doubting it in the phone call, the most downloaded article in 2018 from across all APA journals. And this was incredibly exciting. It's still incredibly exciting to me because it seems to indicate the interest in qualitative methods and people's curiosity about, how do we do this well? How do we report this and do qualitative methods with rigor? And the chapter in the publication manual was co-authored by myself and Mark Applebaum, who is chair of the Quantitative Journal Article Reporting Standards Committee, with support of APA staff. And I'm really excited about that. There are some main differences from the quantitative jars. So one is that we are really trying to think through, how do we support qualitative methods and the diversity of qualitative methods to report in ways that make sense given their own traditions. So we have different sorts of caveats, like sections can be organized differently depending on the approach. We support researchers to be really transparent and to be reflective about their positions and their interactions with research participants. And to consider methodological integrity. And throughout the reporting standards, we have tips that are in there for authors and for reviewers, because we're realizing that these approaches are still new to many people. Also, I created a video at APA on how to review a qualitative research manuscript, and APA has been wonderful at helping to distribute this information. We've had really positive responses, both internationally and interdisciplinary, from interdisciplinary audiences, and so that's been also unexpected and incredibly gratifying. So in conclusion, I just wanted to express again how incredibly honored I am by this award, and really to join the ranks of qualitative researchers who I hold in just incredible esteem. Thank you to Division 5 and the members of the awards committee, Ruth Ellen Josselson, Mark Freeman, and Cynthia Winston Proctor, and Rich Gonzalez, Rochelle Michelle, and Ken Kelly. And thank you to APA for developing recommendations and standards to strengthen the implementation of qualitative methods, and to you for your attention. I invite now Eric Youngstrom to share some closing remarks.
Don't we get to applaud?
But first, applause.
Thank you.
And a huge thank you to everyone who served on the awards committees, and Division 5 has several awards committees. Thank you to everyone who took the time to nominate people. What a wonderful array of presentations and content. I also want to thank Heidi for the work in adapting the program and really making this possible, and all of the presenters for adapting their presentations to be able to do this via Zoom. We've never had to do that before, and that was a big unknown, and it really came together beautifully. Being able to see each other, to hear each other, to feel the palpable pride and excitement of the nominators and the awardees, just really, really, really neat. I want to thank everyone who took the time to come and be a part of this celebration together, and also want to thank the audiences who are going to see this in the future. Because this is recorded, this is actually going to be played as part of the convention proceedings in the first week of August. And this is going to live on the Division 5 website, which is going to create a resource that we'll be able to visit again. A lot of this is going to be neat to be able to play for students and classes, share with friends, share with family. My father is a research chemist, and I grew up with lots of teasing from him about, son, should have gotten a real science. And as we've continued to talk over the decades, he's really come to respect what psychology does. And for me, Division 5 embodies what is unique about psychology and what is so powerful about what we do. We're the Society for Quantitative and Qualitative Methods, and we're trying to understand how to measure what really, truly matters. When we are talking about a latent variable, or when we are talking about a qualitative approach to really understanding people's lived experience and conveying that with fidelity, with accuracy, in a way that we learn from, that is measuring what matters. And we have earned the grudging respect of my father being like, yeah, no, chemicals in a test tube or a chromatographic column, much, much, much easier to measure. But what we are trying to measure is not easy, but we persist because it is so important. And how powerful to have taken the 2 hours together and to reflect on where we have been as a field, hear from leaders who have really moved the ball. As Dr. Aiken was presenting her slides, I recognized tables from her. I have the Softbound Sage book. I have Cohen and Aiken and West, the 3rd edition of the Bible. And so I recognize, yes, those are foundational things that we've accomplished. And what we just heard with Dr. Levitt is let's rewrite the rules. Let's come up with guidelines to do research that really has impact. Where else besides Division 5 are we going to hear a set of talks that have formulas and equations and talking about people's experience and research, which is heartbreaking and heart-opening? Wow. Wow. Thank you all for the wonderful work that you brought together that culminated in this experience today. I am so glad to be a part of this division. So looking forward to what we accomplish together in the years to come. We've heard from some of the luminaries in the field, and we have heard from the rising stars who are really going to move us forward in very powerful, very exciting ways. Thank you so much, and welcome to the after party.